Hi, welcome to the second lecture on individualization. This is week 8 of Modernity on Screen. And remember, this is the first time we're trying this style of teaching delivery, so please bear with me if there are a few kind of rough elements to it. I'm sure we'll get better at doing this kind of thing as time goes on. I wanted to pick up on some of the ideas that we were discussing in the first session when we talked about the way that our society has changed over really the past 20, 30, 40 years to become one which requires us to act as individuals. We talked about those ideas of individualization and governance and the work of the sociologist Ulrich Beck, who writes about the way that we are required to become the managers of our own kind of choice biography and to perform our own individuality day by day as a kind of precondition of our citizenship in late modern society. So I wanted to talk this time about a whole series of films, or a cycle of films, that I think we can see as a kind of response to some of these issues and anxieties that Ulrich Beck raises. And these were termed American smart film by Jeffrey Sconce, the film theorist. And that term is kind of in scare quotes because what makes them smart is that they tend to define themselves in opposition to the presupposed dumbness of conventional mainstream American Hollywood cinema. Now, there's a lot of overlap here with the type of cinema that's been termed Indiewood, or just contemporary independent cinema generally. And I'm not going to rehash that because for those of you who did film and creativity and contemporary Hollywood, which should be most, if not all of you, then those should be pretty familiar ideas and arguments. Suffice it to say that Sconce looks at American smart film from the perspective of its aesthetics and its set of consistent themes, and that those seem to emerge out of a kind of response to issues of individualization and anxieties about the society in which we're living today. Now, Sconce defines smart film as an American school of filmmaking that survives and at times thrives in the symbolic and material intersections of Hollywood on the one hand and the indie scene on the other hand, and also occupies some of that territory that we kind of nebulously define as art cinema, whatever exactly that means. And it has a strange kind of contradictory character. So the kind of social cultural formation of smart film is that it's defined in its marketing, in the way that the filmmakers talk, in opposition to conventional Hollywood. Yet its aesthetics tend to be very closely aligned to Hollywood. So for Sconce, whereas conventional art film or historical art film tended to attempt aesthetic strategies and filmmaking techniques that differentiated it from Hollywood, that's not really the way that contemporary smart film tries to define itself. Instead, smart film attempts to position itself narratively in ways that work with Hollywood convention, that build upon conventional or classical Hollywood narration. Now, at the same time as they work with conventional Hollywood norms, smart film also kind of eschews the traditional political or social activism that we would associate with American independent cinema of, say, the 1970s, or with art cinema of the post-war period. And instead, it emphasizes the politics of the personal, of personal growth, of personal triumph. There's a kind of a language of therapy, of self-help culture that runs through a lot of this cinema. But at the same time, it mocks that culture. It uses that as the kind of the atmosphere that everyone lives in, but it's never quite sure whether to take that atmosphere seriously or whether it's something that is ridiculous. It mocks it but doesn't necessarily know how to step outside of the terms that it establishes. And I think one of the things that you see there is a kind of mirror of some of the things we talked about with individualization. That sense that although individualization comes out of this sense that we've knocked down a lot of those old models, we've knocked down our belief in religion and family, out of that kind of generalized postmodern skepticism towards meta-narratives that Lyotard talks about, it doesn't know what to put in its place. And smart film is the body of American cinema, at least, that has been most interested in offering ideas about what might be in its place, and exploring that kind of psychic territory. So let me give you a little sense of the kind of thing I'm talking about here, then. I want to show you a brief clip from the Todd Solondz film Happiness, which is one of the films that Sconce picks out as emblematic of the contemporary culture of smart film. And then I want to discuss some of the ways that this throws up issues which some commentators have found very troubling about this body of films, and which I think can be troubling for Sconce's category of smart film as a kind of nascent genre or cycle. So, Happiness.
Dad?
Yes, Billy?
What does come mean?
Come?
You know.
Well, you know how sometimes your penis gets erect. Well, sometimes it gets so excited that a sticky, milky substance shoots out.
Dick what?
Yes, only come can be used as a verb as well. Billy.
Yeah.
Have you ever come?
Yeah.
Now, Billy, it's all right if you haven't.
But I have.
Billy.
But everyone else in class has, and I want to come too.
Now, it's okay. It's okay. Have you tried playing with yourself?
You mean?
With your penis?
A little.
How did it feel?
I don't know. I don't know what to do.
Do you want me to show you?
No. I'm not normal.
No, Billy. No, don't worry, you're normal. No. Hey, you'll come one day. You'll see.
Now, as uncomfortable as that conversation between a father and son probably is, even without any extra context, it's important to know that in the context of the film, Billy's father is a pedophile who rapes two of the little boys who live in the neighborhood, and whose sexual attraction to his own son is always a kind of ghost of these father-son conversations, which are already disturbing in their kind of frankness. Particularly with an American culture, then, smart film takes part in this kind of debate over the place of irony in our society. And films like Happiness, and also others of a similar time period, like Peter Berg's Very Bad Things, fed into a sense that the culture was becoming kind of unhealthily ironic, that there was something disturbing about a group of people or a generation that could laugh at some of the kind of terrible things that were being depicted on screen. And Sconce puts this on partially on figures like Pat Buchanan, who in 1992 kind of led a charge from the far right of the Republican Party in what was later called the Culture War speech at the Republican National Convention, And this was about trying to take back, America for traditional American values. And the enemies were some of the kind of predictable and obvious ones that we've seen, things like abortion rights and gay rights, which the Republicans have been opposed to for years. But they were also things like moral relativism and irony, much more nebulous concepts, which, for right-wing commentators, were part of a kind of continuum of dangerous and un-American ideas that were really eroding the fabric of society, or I suppose unraveling the fabric of society, not to mix a metaphor. And figures like Buchanan led this sort of battle against irony and against the kind of valorization of trash culture that was starting to become common in the 1990s. And it wasn't just members of the socially conservative right who were uncomfortable with the increasing prevalence of irony in our culture. There was a significant element of the commentariat who were uncomfortable with what it was doing to our sense of aesthetics. If we could get just as much enjoyment out of a movie that was so bad that it's good as we could out of a great masterpiece, then why go to the trouble of making great masterpieces? And so there's this kind of generalized sense among a lot of the press and a lot of different groups in the 90s that irony is something that needs to be fought against. Irony is something that has become too prevalent in our society. And Beers, whom Scott cites at one point, writes about this, saying that somehow irony has come to be a kind of handy shorthand for moral relativism and self-absorption, for consuming everything that is puerile, and also considering yourself too hip to be implicated in the supply and demand economics of schlock. And of course, there's a further irony to all of this ironic consumption that characterizes the early 90s. Once you take away that kind of cultural stigma around consuming bad objects, it starts to affect mainstream taste culture, so that we move from something like this, in an early example of smart film.
It's all a whole bunch of horrible values.
More beer?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Or like Saturday morning cartoons, it's all a whole bunch of values and junk they're throwing at you. Like take Scooby-Doo, Scooby-Doo looks at you, it's like they're Shaggy and they're Scooby-Doo, and they say, hey, why don't you beat the shit out of this bad guy, and we'll give you a Scooby snack. And they'll go, oh, duh. And they'll say, well, 2 Scooby snacks. Yeah, exactly. That's what they're teaching kids. It's all bribery, and they're teaching kids fucking bribery,
And then you got the...
To something like this as a summer blockbuster.
Are you challenging me? Maybe. Pull my finger. Uh-oh, too late. You're in trouble. Oh boy. I'm not stopping till you're first singed off.
Oh, Buffy, what do you have to say for yourself?
That'll put marzipan in your pie plate, bingo.
Touché. Now, whatever our level of comfort with irony on a moral or aesthetic level, it shouldn't mask the fact that there is some clever stuff going on in smart film. And, if you look at that Sullins clip from Happiness, you've got a movie which plays with ideas of conventional Hollywood narration. It puts us in this kind of father-son situation with the meaningful talk between dad and kid, and then makes us deeply uncomfortable throughout that talk, first just with the explicit language that they're using, and then finally by going back to the Hollywood norms with the swelling music, with the father and son embracing, and the gee, aw shucks kind of punch on the shoulder to seal the deal. We've got here almost an episode of Leave It to Beaver, but given that kind of distressing pedophilic subtext, which I think you can argue is a very clear critique of some of the things that structure of American family life, and that idealized version of American family life, is trying to cover up. Now, we'll return to that question of the family, which is really at the center of a lot of new American smart film, but I think we need to think a little bit more about the way that irony is being used here. Sconce is very keen to get us to think beyond the kind of cultural discourse about irony, the moral panic about irony that comes from the social right and the aesthetic left, and to get us to think about the way irony is being employed in these films. And he regards it really as a tactic, and it's a tactic that comes out of a particular sector of society, one which came to be known throughout the 90s as Generation X. Now, when I was growing up, there was a tremendous kind of larger moral panic around Generation X, which is tied into all of this concern about irony. I was, I think, technically born in the last year of Gen X. It's probably more associated with people the age of, say, the cast of Friends. And in general, Gen Xers were the generation that came after the baby boomers. And they looked around at their own lives, and they didn't see the prosperity and the possibility that the baby boomers not only had, but were able to take for granted. And as a response to this, Generation X rebelled against that. They prided themselves in not taking seriously the things that were important to the baby boomers. And there's a negative way of reading that, which is that they weren't serious, they weren't driven. There is some justice even to the claim that they weren't socially and politically active in the same ways as previous generations. But that comes out of their distrust of the activism of those generations, which started with Woodstock and ended up in Wall Street, and didn't seem like such a great role model as a result of that. Sconce wants us to think about the way that Gen Xers and the smart film directors, many of whom are either from the very late period of the baby boom or the very early period of Gen X, the way that they mobilize irony, the way that they use it as a tactic of disaffection in his terms. He talks about a certain social formation which is defined maybe more by a desire to be bohemian or countercultural than by strict age delineations or generations, which created a kind of culture of semiotic exile during the 1990s by reading against the grain the things that they took from mainstream culture, while also cultivating a new voice of cynical detachment.
Are you being sarcastic, dude?
I don't even know anymore.
Now, although the culture of irony is one of the things that gives smart film its eventual shape, it's not the only thing that defines it. And indeed, you can find evidence of that culture of irony across things that certainly have no part of smart film. Using irony as a tactic is one of the things that distinguishes this genre of cinema, as opposed to simply using irony or reference or kind of postmodern bricolage in the way that something like, say, the Scary Movie franchise does, where there's no real critical project. There's just a series of gags. But if we look at smart film, we can start to pick out a few different aesthetic strategies which distinguish a lot of the films in this field. Certainly not all of them, but which are shared across enough films that are coming out in the 90s and the 2000s that they constitute something like an emergent style, or at least a set of films that talk to each other. So we'll take a look at a couple of clips now, and then I want to try and bring out some of the points connected to this. The first of Sconce's points that I think is significant here is that he notes a number of these films have what he calls a blank style, but at the same time a narration, sometimes a literal voiceover narration, which is at odds with that blankness of style.
Sorry. I have a little announcement to make. Since it's almost tomorrow, and tomorrow happens to be Carol's birthday, we have a little surprise for her.
She's a jolly good fellow, she's a jolly good fellow, she's a jolly good fellow.
can't. I've never made a speech in my life.
Please.
Oh, God. I just want to thank Chris for doing this. And everybody here so much. You pulled me through a really hard period. Anyway, I couldn't have done it without you. I don't know what I'm saying. I just that I really hated myself before I came here, and so I'm trying to see myself hopefully more as I am, more positive, like seeing the pluses. Like, I think it's slowly opening up now, people's minds, like educating and AIDS and other types of diseases, and it is a disease because it's out there, and we just have to be more aware of it, to make people aware of it, and even ourselves, like reading labels and going into buildings.
To Carol.
Now, Sconce sees scenes like that one from Safe as really prototypical of the smart film aesthetic of blankness. And again, you can see it where it overlaps with some conventional Hollywood techniques. We've got Carol framed very clearly in the center, and we very slowly zoom in on her. Now, in a conventional Hollywood film, that's a moment of revelation. It's the moment where the hero of the film has arrived at the final point on their journey, and they express what it is they've learned. They show us that they have changed, that they have grown. In this case, though, as Carol rambles on, as her incoherent speech sort of stumbles from self-help cliche to, new wave truism, you realize there isn't going to be any redemption for this woman. She is beyond help. She's certainly beyond her own help. And that cut, that hard cut after the slow zoom in to all the people standing around, and that moment of silence that's held that little bit too long before they raise a glass in honor of Carol for God knows what reason, is that very subtle way that Haynes has of commenting on these things, of taking that therapeutic discourse, of taking Carol's journey and showing us the fruitlessness, the meaninglessness of that journey. It's one of the ways in which we can look at the irony and the blankness of smart film as a piece of commentary. Now, that doesn't mean that all smart film falls back on blankness as a way of being ironic or of undercutting itself. And you can find examples of contemporary smart film that use similar devices, but use them in ways which are more hopeful, although still not without a bit of ambivalence.
I'm not following you. My car is parked over there.
In Smart Park?
No, on Front Street.
Oh, I parked in Smart Park.
So at the end of the next block, we'll separate at Tyrone Street.
Yep, the Iceland sign is halfway. It's the halfway point.
Iceland it's kind of like that point in a relationship, where you suddenly realize it's not going to last forever. You can see the end in sight. Tyrone Street.
Yeah, but we're not even there yet. We're still at the good part. We're not even sick of each other yet.
I'm not sick of you at all. And whoa, it's been a good, 6 months, right?
What, 6 months? then the Iceland sign is like 8 months. You think we'd only last a year and a half?
I don't know. I don't want to be presumptuous. Yeah, I don't know if you're married or
not.
what.
Well, I'm separated. We separated last month. I was thinking that Tyrone was like 20 years away at least.
Yeah? Okay, well, actually, I was thinking Tyrone is like when we die of old age. And this is like our whole life together, this block.
See, that's perfect. Let's do it that way.
Okay. Avoided. Everyone dies.
I could walk you to your car.
Maybe we should just be glad that we lived this long, good life together. You know, it's so much more than most people ever get to have.
Okay.
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 Okay. Well, don't be afraid.
Okay.
Here we go.
Here we go.
So, in Me, You, and Everyone We Know, we get a variation on that same kind of blankness, and again, a spin on a conventional Hollywood technique. Here we've got the romantic comedy Meet Cute. That's just happened before the scene we see here. And instead of that leading into further cuteness, it leads into this awkward, slightly too close, slightly desperate conversation between two people whom we nevertheless kind of hope will get it together in some way, will manage to get over their slight desperateness and make something work. And it finishes on that moment of ambivalence, that parting while they still both clearly don't want to part, which suggests the possibility of something further down the line. So it's important to remember that although irony and a mistrust of conventional depictions is part of the core of films like these, they use that to comment on things very differently. You get that kind of stark depiction of the blankness of something like Safe, and you also get the more hopeful blankness, the blankness of further possibility in Me, You, and Everyone We Know. Now, if that blankness comes from a desire not to be seen to be investing too much in these things, out of that kind of fear of seeming unhip by being suddenly too sincere, which I think there's an argument that it does come from that in a lot of contemporary smart film, then there's also sometimes a kind of naive hopefulness, a desire to find meaning in sometimes unexpected and incongruous places, which Sconce talks about as a fascination with synchronicity as a principle of narrative organization, an interest in coincidence, in unexpected or unbelievable events which aren't questioned because they're simply part of the world that is depicted in these films. And you can find a lot of examples of this kind of thing in the way it plays out in smart film, but it's right at the core of Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia.
17-year-old Sidney Barringer in the city of Los Angeles on March 23rd, 1958. The coroner ruled that the unsuccessful suicide had suddenly become a successful homicide. To explain, the suicide was confirmed by a note in the right hip pocket of Sidney Barringer. At the same time young Sidney stood on the ledge of this 9-story building, an argument swelled 3 stories below. The neighbors heard, as they usually did, the arguing of the tenants, and it was not uncommon for them to threaten each other with a shotgun or one of the many handguns kept in the house.
I'm gonna put you
And when the shotgun accidentally went off, Sidney just happened to pass.
What? Shut the fuck up!
Added to this, the two tenants turned out to be Faye and Arthur Barringer, Sidney's mother and Sidney's father. When confronted with the charge, which took some figuring out for the officers on the scene of the crime, Faye Barringer swore that she did not know the gun was loaded.
She always threatens me with a gun, but I don't keep it loaded.
And you didn't load the gun?
Why would I load the gun?
A young boy who lived in the building, sometimes a visitor and friend to Sidney Barringer, said that he had seen, 6 days prior, the loading of the shotgun.
Ricky, come here a minute.
It seems that all the arguing and fighting and all of the violence was far too much for Sidney Barringer, and knowing his mother and father's tendency to fight, he decided to do something.
He said that he wanted them to kill each other, and that's all that they wanted to do is to kill each other, and that he would help them do that if that's what they wanted to do.
Sidney Barringer jumps from the 9th floor rooftop. His parents argue 3 stories below. Her accidental shotgun blast hits Sidney in the stomach as he passes the arguing 6th floor window. He is killed instantly, but continues to fall, only to find, 5 stories below, a safety net installed 3 days prior for a set of window washers that would have broken his fall and saved his life, if not for the hole in his stomach. So Faye Barringer was charged with the murder of her son, and Sidney Barringer noted as an accomplice in his own death. And it is in the humble opinion of this narrator that this is not just something that happened. This cannot be one of those things. This, please, cannot be that.
So again we have that blankness and that incongruous narration. We've got the narrator who, although he seems distant, he seems to be recounting something kind of once half heard, also is terribly invested in this. And there's even a little visual suggestion there. Maybe the narrator is the kid who witnessed Sidney Barringer loading the shotgun. We don't know, really. It's simply one possibility among many in terms of the way we interpret something like that. But there's something of that kind of desperate desire that was also prevalent in Yumi and everyone we know. That desire for coincidence to have meaning, for the little everyday encounters that we have to be significant in ways which the end of our faith in grand narratives has meant that often we aren't able to believe they're significant. Magnolia is a kind of grandiose statement about coincidence and improbability and the ability to find something to believe in within all of that. Although it's not portrayed as coincidence as such, it's part of the end of a long journey, that same desperation to believe can be seen at the end of something like The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, where the central character pursues this kind of Ahab-like quest after a sea creature that has been responsible for the death of a close friend. But even he never seems to really believe in the reasons for that quest. He talks about wanting revenge, and he also talks about the kind of scientific curiosity that used to motivate his adventures. But over the course of the film, he seems to have lost faith in his own legend, and the film seems to suggest, with its claymation versions of sea creatures, that maybe the things he saw were always in his own mind, were always fantastic contraptions and creations of his imagination that he was able to convey to people through the strength of his personality. So in the final moments of the film, when you have all of the people who've been involved in this adventure with him in the submersible looking for the jaguar shark, we have this kind of possibility for maybe redemption, maybe a possibility for him to be vindicated, for him to be right all along. But what we get is something that is, while still being hopeful, a little more complicated than that.
soon, Klaus.
Are we safe in here?
I doubt it.
You still want to blow him up?
No, we're out of dynamite anyway.
It is beautiful, Steve.
Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it? I wonder if it remembers me.
In 12 years, he'll be 11 and a half.
That was my favorite age.
Like this?
Just like that.
You do it too.
We complete the adventure, but another member of our crew has been lost. This one was my son. Also our equity partner. We start the voyage home in our wounded vessel.
Now, at one level, you've got the classic Hollywood ending. Their quest is successful, he relents, he doesn't destroy the shark, he lives up to the scientific values that he supposedly espoused for all those years. But at another, the film moves us away from even caring about the truth of the narrative at the end. I mean, note, very early on, there's a reverse shot. We see Steve, Bill Murray's character, with his hands on the control panel, holding the steering stick on the submersible, and then we cut to a reverse shot, which shows that steering stick with no hands anywhere near it. Now, that kind of juxtaposition isn't accidental. It's giving us yet another little hint that what we're seeing is not reality as such, it's a projection. And the significance of the scene has nothing to do with whether or not there is a real jaguar shark, or whether these two kind of opposing forces have actually engaged with one another finally, whether Steve's found his prey. What it's really about is that all the people who love him, and even some people who hate him, finally join with him in that vision, and join with him in a moment of mourning for the son he had only just found prior to losing him through negligence and narcissism. And that kind of emotional pull, that emotional payoff, is one of the things that's worth noting about smart film. Yes, irony is the water that it swims in, the air that it breathes, but it's not all it wants, it's not all it hopes to be. Most of these movies have something hopeful in them, have something they desire beyond the kind of ironic blankness, whether they know exactly how to get it or not. And Steve Zissou does seem to get it at the end of the film. In many of the others, we get something a bit more ambivalent, a bit less hopeful. Now, there's clearly a distinction here to be made between those films with that kind of hopeful outlook and between those that are more pessimistic or even nihilistic. And that's been one of the kind of consistent critiques, especially of the earlier generation of smart film, particularly the kind of Peter Bergs, the Todd Solondz, that there's no possibility of redemption here, there's no hope here. The LA Weekly film critic Manola Dargis writes about what she talks about as the pervading sense that moral choice isn't just difficult in these movies, it's impossible and maybe even irrelevant. In all of these movies, people do bad and even venal things to each other, but so what? She talks about happiness where a man rapes his son's friends, but because his family is entirely predicated on ugly untruths, there's no real sense of loss when everything finally implodes. And she even goes so far as to suggest that right now, or at least in the early 90s, we're being inundated with a cinema of hate, a cinema that encourages our sadism, our scorn, and worst of all, our total disinterest towards the world, other human beings, and just maybe ourselves.
Well, man, they were nihilists, man.
Huh?
They kept saying they believed in nothing.
Nihilists. Fuck me.
The charge of nihilism is one that it's not necessarily easy for these films to get away from. Even in some of the lighter films, some of the kind of Wes Anderson movies, there is a kind of critical line which suggests that there's no real meaning here, that it is all flash and no substance, and that ultimately none of it truly means anything beyond being a bit funny or a bit cool or a bit quirky.
I'm not quirky, though. That's the thing.
Now, to step away for a moment from Jeffrey Sconce's work, we should examine that term quirky, because it gets thrown around a lot in discussions of these movies. I mean, all of Wes Anderson's films can be characterized that way. Certainly, Me, You, and Everyone We Know, and several of the others that we'll examine throughout the course of this lecture. And the really sustained examination of the term quirky has largely come from the scholar James McDowell, who examines first the critical discourse around that word, and then uses that to kind of track back to films which have been called quirky, and discusses, where that quirk might lie. And for McDowell, quirkiness is really about a kind of mixture of comic registers. Irony is wrapped up in there, and distance at some level from the characters is part of quirkiness. We stand slightly apart from them because we need to be critical of them. They are often pretty ridiculous people. But at the same time, for McDowell, what distinguishes quirkiness from the kind of blank irony or the nihilistic irony that might characterize, say, a Todd Solondz film like Happiness, is that in the quirky film, we're invited to be sympathetic and critical at the same time. It often feels like in quirky movies, like, say, a Wes Anderson film, when we're laughing at the characters' foibles, it's because they're familiar, they're recognizable to us. Hopefully, the foible of being a pedophilic father is not particularly familiar or recognizable to us. And I don't know that we really believe that Beneath the Heart of Suburbia beats this kind of twisted, dark mass of hate that we see in something like a Todd Solondz film. But I think we can believe that beneath the heart of every ordinary man and woman, beneath the heart of every hipster, there is a sad, scared little person who's just trying to get by in the world. And that's often what we see in the films which are most commonly described as quirky. Certainly those are the things that McDowell picks out. And he writes about this in his clearest terms in an article about Wes Anderson's films, writing that the mixture of comic registers in quirky films means that we can simultaneously regard a film's fictional world as partly unbelievable, laugh at its flat treatment of melodramatic situations, and yet still be invited to be moved by its characters' misadventures. So in these sorts of films, we're not on some kind of distant ironic peak gazing down at these characters. We are with them in their predicaments. We care about what happens to them, and we feel it some way familiar to us. Now, the territory on which this kind of battle between the meaningless and the meaningful in smart film or in quirky cinema, or whatever label you want to give, is played out is really the kind of middle-class white American family. And there's an overlap here with some of the stuff we talked about last week when we examined the male-centered serial in contemporary television. In both of these movements, what you have is an examination not of contemporary, diverse, cosmopolitan culture, which is traditionally the way to make good liberal media. What you have instead is an examination of older, arguably discredited forms of family life, of the nuclear family, of the extended family, of the patriarchy. And that examination is sometimes implicitly and sometimes very explicitly critical. And sometimes looks at these things systemically and sometimes from an individualistic point of view. But across all of the kind of texts we're looking at, the central sort of subject matter is the white middle-class family. And the default setting seems to be that it is the site of terrible miscommunication, of misunderstanding, of people who can't get along with each other and have harmed one another in various ways over the years. And that's there very obviously in something like Happiness, which is about truly poisonous, dangerously poisonous family relationships. But it's there also in the softer cinema, the more hopeful cinema, that characterizes the quirky sensibility.
She's a tough old broad, wasn't she?
I wouldn't know. Excuse me.
Oh, that's right. We've got another body buried here, haven't we? Hold on. Take some of these. So what do you think of this big old black buck moving in up there?
Who?
Henry Sherman. You know him?
Yeah,
Is he worth a damn?
I believe so.
What happened to your finger?
Shh. It's okay, I'll tell you. I'm adopted. Did you know that? Well, I am. When I was 14, I went to find my real family. They live in Indiana.
All right, now just set one of them hickory trunks right up top there, Sister Maggie.
Did you try to sew it back on?
Wasn't worth it.
Hell of a damn grave. Wish it were mine. It's a shame, isn't it?
What?
You probably had another good 2 or 3 years of competitive play in you.
Probably.
I had a lot riding on that match, you know, financially and personally. Why'd you choke out there that day, Bummer?
Mr. Gundy leads 40-15.
That's 72 unforced errors for Richie Tenenbaum. He's playing the worst tennis of his life. What's he feeling right now, Tex Hayward?
I don't know, Jim. There's obviously something wrong with him. He's taken off his shoes and one of his socks, and actually, I think he's crying.
I think you're right. Who's he looking at in the friends box, Tex?
That's his sister Margot and her new husband, Raleigh Sinclair. They were just married yesterday, Jim.
Oh, yes.
I've never seen anything like this.
Neither have I. Strange day out here at Windswept Fields.
I kind of disappeared after that, didn't I?
Yeah. But I understood. I know you're not very good with disappointment.
You still got that little BB in your hands, has he?
Why'd you shoot me?
It's the object of the game, wasn't it?
No. We were on the same team.
Were we? Well, you sued me twice, got me disbarred. I don't hold it against you, do I?
And how is it possible for Mr. Tenenbaum to withdraw these funds without your written authorization?
Objection, Your Honor. Damn it.
Why don't you leave the objections to me, Royal?
Because I started the corporation when I was a minor, so my father was the primary signatory on most of my accounts. He also stole bonds out of my safety deposit box when I was 14.
You think you could start forgiving me?
Why should I?
Because you're hurting me. Come on.
Were you in prison?
Kinda. Minimum security. I got jacked by the IRS. Shall we split?
Yes, sir.
No, call me Mr. Tenenbaum.
Okay.
Oh, I'm kidding. Call me Pappy.
Okay.
Come on, let's shag ass.
So even in the most gentle films of this cycle, we get incest, we get child neglect, we get terrible strife between members of the family. Now here it's played for melancholy and even for light laughs rather than for the kind of dark pathos that you get in something like Happiness. But the territory is very much the same, and that sense of the family as a kind of crucible of self-destruction is one of the constant themes of this kind of work. And remember, it goes back to those narratives of individualization, to that idea that we've lost faith in the major structures that define us, and so we're embarked on this project of self-definition. And in the Royal Tenenbaums, the children's identities are clearly marked as being kind of failures of self-definition. They are all, in one way or another, trapped in the same identity that they used to embody as children at this sort of mythical time when things were good, when their lives made sense. And the film is filled with items that are kind of remnants and relics of that childhood. And in some ways it's by putting those aside that they're able to move on. And in some ways it's by embracing their inability to put them aside that they're able to move on. You know, these aren't characters who grow and change a great deal by the end of the film. It's more that they accept their inability to change. Now that emphasis on objects, on the kind of taste culture of nostalgia, also touches on another area of smart film that Jeffrey Sconce identifies, which is its obsession with consumerism. Now, it may not seem quite such an obvious connection to something like the films of Wes Anderson because they're so tied to a nostalgic aesthetic, but remember the kind of retro chic appeal of a lot of 90s, 2000s, and more recent culture comes out of nostalgia. You know, we've seen the old commodified in new ways, and contemporary hipster identity is very tightly connected to the commodification of vintage and retro items. So the fact that the Tenenbaums and Wes Anderson's other characters are stuck in the past doesn't mean they're not commodity obsessives. In fact, his films, if anything, are more attentive to objects and to their significance than many of these other films. But most contemporary smart film kind of shares a notion of what is problematic in the way that we consume goods and services. And that runs through films like Fight Club, which we've talked about to some extent in sessions on individualization as well, and films like American Beauty.
Let me start earlier. For 6 months, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. With insomnia, nothing's real. Everything's far away. Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy. When deep space exploration ramps up, it'll be the corporations that name everything. The IBM Stellar Sphere, the Microsoft Galaxy, Planet Starbucks.
Gonna need you out of town a little more this week. We got some red flags to cover.
It must have been Tuesday. He was wearing his cornflower blue tie.
You want me to deprioritize my current reports until you advise of a status upgrade?
Make these your primary action items. Here's your flight coupons. Call me from the road if there's any snags.
He was full of pep. Must have had his grande latte enema. Like so many others, I had become a slave to the IKEA nesting instinct.
Yes. I'd like to order the Erica Picari dust ruffles.
If I saw something clever, like a little coffee table in the shape of a yin-yang, I had to have it. The Klipsk personal office unit, the Hovatrek home exerbike, or the Yohanneshav sofa with the string green stripe pattern. Even the Rizlampa wire lamps of environmentally friendly unbleached paper. I'd flip through catalogs and wonder, what kind of dining set defines me as a person? I had it all, even the glass dishes with tiny bubbles and imperfections, proof that they were crafted by the honest, simple, hard-working indigenous peoples of wherever.
I was holding.
We used to read pornography. Now it was the Horchow collection.
What?
Whose car is that out front?
Mine. 1970 Pontiac Firebird, the car I've always wanted, and now I have it.
I rule.
Uh-huh, where's the Camry?
I traded it in.
Shouldn't you have consulted me first?
Let me think. No, you never drove it. Have you done something different? You look great.
Where's Jane?
Jane not home. We have the whole house to ourselves. Christ, Carolyn. When did you become so joyless?
Joyless? I am not joyless. There happens to be a lot about me that you don't know, Mr. Smarty Man. There's plenty of joy in my life.
Whatever happened to that girl who used to fake seizures at frat parties when she got bored? Who used to run up to the roof of our first apartment building to flash the traffic helicopters? Have you totally forgotten about her? Because I haven't.
Lester, you're going to spill beer on the couch.
So what? It's just a couch.
This is a $4,000 sofa upholstered in Italian silk. This is not just a couch.
It's just a couch! This isn't life! This is just stuff. And it's become more important to you than living. Well, honey, that's just nuts.
Now, although both of those films obviously have a kind of critical bent towards contemporary consumer culture, you know, something like Fight Club satirizing the IKEA nesting instinct, that desire to define yourself through your furniture, and something like American Beauty satirizing the uptight housewife who defines herself through her sofa, they're both also very ambivalent about those critiques. I mean, the anti-establishment critique of Fight Club eventually descends into anarchistic violence, and in a way that the film ultimately kind of disapproves of. It doesn't say going back to making your life out of a catalog is preferable necessarily, but it certainly doesn't side with the anarchists. And in the same way, American Beauty allows us to simply sit with that idea that we open on Lester Berman's acquisition of this beautiful new car that he desires so much, the one that makes him rule. And then he's critical of his wife being so caring of this very expensive sofa that she's spent her money on. She storms out after that scene, and I like to think it's because of his hypocrisy, rather than because she feels he's scored a point on her. Though, in the film's own terms, I think it's pretty sympathetic to Lester's point of view. But that critique is there, it's not entirely absent from the movie. Now, whether all of these sorts of texts have that same kind of ambivalence is questionable. Some of them may aspire to a degree of ambivalence, but be much more straightforward. I mean, I think that's almost what I'm saying of American Beauty anyway, that it masquerades as something that's more complex than it really is. Actually, it does side with Lester. It does believe him to be a good and righteous man, and that his anti-establishment views are broadly okay, rather than, say, deeply irresponsible. And I think maybe there's something similar going on in a more recent film, which bears some hallmarks of the smart film movement and really feels like an appropriate heir to them. In this case, I'm referring to Juno.
I'm gonna treat you right.
Juno, wow, I didn't expect to see you here.
I
I have something really cool to show you guys. Is Vanessa here?
Nope. Actually, she's working late tonight. She's trying to accrue as much time off as she can before the...
Oh, right. I hear these are quite the time suck.
Yeah. You want to come on in? I'm just having a ginseng cooler. Would you like one?
What is it with you rich people and your herb-infused juices?
That's probably got something to do with those 44-packs they come in. They're not bad, though.
Wait a second. Why aren't you at work?
I work mostly from home. I'm a composer.
No shit. Like Johann Brahms, or...?
No, more commercial stuff.
Like what?
Commercials.
Oh.
Yeah. Have you seen the ads for the Titanium Power men's deodorant?
Titanium power. Get my snatched by the barrage.
Right. Paid for this kitchen.
Whoa. You're quite the sellout, Mark. I mean, what would the Melvins say?
Did you say you had something to show me?
Behold, good sir, your future child.
Hey, look at that.
I think it looks like my friend Polly.
Is he also bald and amorphous?
No, he's the dad.
Oh. Wow. Can you tell if it's a boy or a girl?
I can't. The doctor can, but I kind of want it to be a surprise.
Well, it can only go one of two ways.
That's what you think. I mean, I drink tons of booze, so you might end up with one of those scary neuter babies who's born without junk.
Junk, huh?
Yeah, it's parts.
I know what junk is.
Yeah, right.
We definitely wanted to have some junk, please.
Now, you don't need to worry about a thing. My stepmom Bren makes me eat super healthy. I can't stand in front of the microwave, and no red M&Ms. Hope you're ready.
Ooh. You hear that?
What?
This is my favorite song. This is Sonic Youth doing Superstar by the Carpenters.
Oh, yeah. I know the Carpenters. Chick drummer, freaky dude, not unlike the White Stripes.
You haven't heard the Carpenters like this. Just listen.
Yeah. Yeah, I like this.
What did you say your favorite band was?
Didn't. It's a three-way tie between Stooges, Patti Smith, and the Runaways.
I'm definitely making some CDs, at least with my kids in there.
The Wizard of Gore?
That is Herschel Gordon Lewis. He's the ultimate master of horror.
Please. Dario Argento is so the ultimate master of horror.
Argento? He's all right. But Lewis is completely demented. Okay, we're talking about buckets of goo. I mean, there's red corn syrup all over the place. There's fake brains coming out the yin-yang.
Quite frankly, this looks a little stupid.
Give me the tape.
This is even better than Suspiria.
What did I tell you?
Kudos. You have decent taste in slasher movies.
Here's to dovetailing interests.
So here again, we get commodity fetishism. We get people defining themselves through their ginseng-infused juices, through their taste in music, through their taste in movies. And we get a film which buys into that to a great extent. I mean, Juno is an absolutely kind of archetypal hipster. And one of the promotional images is her having set up a whole kind of retro living room set on her boyfriend's front lawn and smoking a kind of pretentious pipe. And yet, there is also a potentially critical reading there. I mean, the idea at the center of this exchange is that this kind of inappropriate closeness is emerging between the father who, well, the man who will be the father of Juno's baby, and Juno herself. And it's emerging in part because he still maintains this commodity fetishism, which the film figures as a kind of transient thing, as maybe an adolescent thing, something he should have grown out of. Although it doesn't offer any much more appealing options. I mean, the proper grown-ups of the film are not necessarily characters who seem attractive or interesting. They may be more together and more responsible, however. One of the other things that putting Juno in the same basket as, say, American Beauty and Happiness also kind of draws attention to is a very literal interconnection between adults and children, and, in a pretty creepy way. All three of those films have inappropriately aged relationships at their center. Most upsettingly, perhaps, in Happiness, because we're talking about a man who sexually abuses young boys, rather than a man who fantasizes about a 16-year-old cheerleader who does at least reciprocate his interest, in the case of American Beauty, or in Juno, a man who indulges in a flirtation and eventually goes too far with another sort of 16, 17-year-old girl. But in all of these films, what we get is a kind of collision between adulthood and childhood on a literal level, which mirrors the kind of lack of maturation, which is one of the concerns that these films express about characters who are kind of wrapped up in this commodity fetishism, in these objects that define them. Now, it would be easy to go on and continue kind of teasing out similarities and differences across a whole range of smart films, but I'm aware of the time. I've already sort of run over what you would normally get for a lecture and these things, and I want to leave some stuff for us to discuss in the seminars. Now, as you know, the initial plan was to screen Ghost World as a kind of key example, and it's a film with a lot of resonances here. I mean, there are similarities to certainly things like Juno, and there are thematic similarities to several of the films we've discussed in terms of its depiction of consumerism and commodity fetishism, in terms of its kind of flat, ironic tone, and its implicit critique of those elements as well. So I certainly think it's a film that you should consider watching for this week. But as I said, I'm going to post a list of other films that might also be appropriate for you to engage with. Any of the ones that we've shown clips of would be great things to watch to get some wider sense of the ideas around this. And make sure that you've read the sconce and the other materials that are posted on the Hub site so that you're prepared for these discussions. I also want to sort of prepare you for the seminars by suggesting a few questions. I've deliberately not been too interrogative of Sconce's category of smart film, but it's a really problematic category. He lumps together a huge array of different films under this sort of broad heading, and the tonal and thematic differences from one end, the kind of dark comedies, and that's a generous term for things like Very Bad Things, to the kind of very light, sentimental comedy dramas of Wes Anderson, or the much more operatic, kind of melodramatic films of P.T. Anderson. There's a vast array of different films there, and especially because irony is something which is easily detectable well beyond the boundaries of what Sconce says is smart cinema, I wonder if irony is enough of a kind of unifying force to draw these things together. And I think that's something I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on once you've gone around and watched a few more of these films. I think also we should ask about some of the kind of subdivisions within this. McDowell's category of quirky cinema is worth investigating as one possible category, and maybe there is something to the claims of nihilism and fatalism which have dogged the reception of some other areas of smart cinema. So those are some of the questions that we'll be discussing in seminars. We'll also be kind of building on some of Sconce's writing and some of the other things you've been reading, and trying to tie those back into Ulrich Beck's work on individualization and think about the relationship between the kind of atomized individuals of society in late modernity and the films that come out of this smart film movement or sensibility or whatever it is we want to call it. So, I hope you've enjoyed this first stab at a video lecture. I don't know that it's going to become a regular part of teaching, but it's nice to know that we can still provide you with teaching when one of the staff isn't able to be in, and do feel free to give me feedback and let me know what you liked, what could be better, and we'll see if we can incorporate those things in future installments. Alright, and I'll see you guys all in the seminars on Monday.
And there is the account of the hanging of 3 men, and a scuba diver, and a suicide.
There are stories of coincidence and chance and intersections and strange things told, and which is which and who only knows. And we generally say, well, if that was in a movie, I wouldn't believe it. Someone so-and-so met someone else's so-and-so, and so on. And it is in the humble opinion of this narrator that strange things happen all the time. And so it goes, and so it goes, and the book says, we may be through with the past, but the past ain't through with us.